Hi, thank you for joining our webinar. Today we're going to be talking about zero trust and collaboration, reducing risk without disrupting operations. My name is Steve Tessler. I'm a principal solution architect and pre-sales engineer. I've been with Everfox for a little over 13 years. I've covered all the different products in our portfolio, both in the US and the rest of the world. I have covered all the different industries, so commercial, critical infrastructure, civilian, intelligence, and defense. So I've kind of dabbled in a bit of everything. So I have a lot of experience and I've seen a lot of the ways these things have been deployed. And looking forward to talking to you guys about this. So today, what are we covering? We're going to be first starting with zero trust and real collaboration environments. Then we're going to look at see where traditional approaches create friction and risk. See how do you secure the data movement across the domains? How do you reduce the manual steps and workarounds that often kind of creep up in there? And then some of the key principles for secure collaboration and the path forward. So I put this to kind of kick us off this quote because I really like it. Without trust, we don't truly collaborate, we merely cooperate. It's a quote by Steve Covey, and I like that. There's a real nuance between that collaborate and cooperate. Collaborate is a real time taking the same information, working with it together, creating something. It's a give and take of I'm adding a little here, you add a little there, right? You can really get a true collaborative environment where you can create this really important thing out of it, right? Whether it's intelligence, whether it's a common operating picture, whatever it is, it's going to facilitate that success of whatever that mission is. Where cooperating is more of a, hey, can you go do this? Can you do that? Can you help me over here? Can you pass me that information? Right? It's not as real time. It's not as additive in nature, right? It's more kind of like little one-offs here and there. And in today's day, collaboration is really the most important thing, right? That's where the most value is. The problem is in reality, when you're trying to collaborate, you have classified and unclassified systems. You have lots of different partners, right? You have edge and cloud and connectivity problems potentially. Enterprise networks, right? With you have to deal with the enterprise networks and how they might be involved with all the other things as well, right? There's a lot of pieces, a lot of different areas that have to be considered, and why collaboration is hard, right? And why cooperation has kind of been the standard for a really long time. And just to, kind of further illustrate, if you take like a defense type of environment, there's a lot of pieces here, right? You have soldiers in the field, you have the land, you have the air, you have the sea, you have the space, you have enterprise, you have cloud, and they all have different sensors, different missions, different, uses for the data, different timeliness that they need that data, how they're working with it. And then this is just one picture, right? This is just one nation. Now, if you are trying to work with mission partners, they have something similar. So how do you bring all of these together to create a collaborative environment? Right? And that's really the challenge, and that's why we're talking about this today. And it's something that is very, very relevant today, right? This is what everyone is trying to do. And it's important, it's hard and it's important to be talking about. We're talking about though, because the demand to do it is great, but the controls that are out there to allow it in the way that it needs to happen, or at least that the folks who are trying to use the data want it to happen, the controls just aren't really there. So what you find is you get slow data, you have to go through manual processes, and it becomes a real problem, and it really slows down to the point where it's almost more cooperation than collaboration, and it becomes difficult. Um, so there's some attempts to get this to make it more collaborative in a secure environment, right? So zero trust architectures are really what's being pushed right now, where you have explicit controls, you know the who, what, where, when, and how data is moving, right? So you do continuous verification, you have identity, who, what system, right? You're authenticating, you have the policies to kind of ensure that the data is moving as expected. But there are limitations to what zero trust architectures encompass. Um, Generally, they aren't really thinking about classification handling in terms of like tagging and labeling. There are a bunch of different zero trust models, and the majority of them don't really talk about that. Content inspection, sanitization, again, it's not really concerned about that piece of it. It's is it an approved type of document from an authorized user going to an authorized source, right? It's not really looking at the content itself. And then there's really no talk about cross-domain in here, right? So the zero trust architecture really ends at your boundary. It's once the data is in the organization, that's where it all kind of kicks off, and that's where zero trust picks up. The problem is when you're collaborating, you need to trust the data that you're receiving. And how do you do that, right? How do you protect yourself from the cybersecurity and data security concerns? How do you ensure the who, what, where, when, and how of that data, right? Is it really my partner? Is it from their system? Is it really the data I'm expecting? Those are things that Zero Trust doesn't really talk about, but when you're truly wanting to collaborate in an automated manner, you need to have that, right? You have that internally. That's why you can collaborate internally. How do I extend that across the boundary? And that's why our CEO, Dave Waisgrass, he said zero trust on its own is no longer enough, right? Because that architecture, while it's being pushed and it's fantastic, it's missing that one area, right? It's missing the data, the content of the files, and it's missing the cross-domain pieces of it. So we put together this circle here we call the cybersecurity trinity, right? Where we feel that there's these three areas that really need to work together to really enable collaboration between different organizations or different air-gapped groups. And that's the zero trust architecture, the data-centric security, and then the cross-domain solutions. And when you bring these together, like what I was just saying, like it brings together that trust where you can really truly collaborate, right? Where you're having not just that the who, what, where, when, and how, but going through a cross-domain device that's validating all that, so extending it to your boundary, and then ensuring with the data-centric security that you know where it is, where it's moving, and it's what the data is that you're expecting. Now, it's not easy though, right? It kind of sounds easy, but there are a lot of environments that are involved with this, right? So you have different teams, you have different agencies, coalition partners. There's sensitive data from all different channels. You're talking about email, chat, could be web portals, right? Different systems that are collaborating. And then, you add into it that this is sensitive data. It's air gapped for a reason, right? So, how is it that so how do I protect that data from people who are trying to get to that data, right? So I'm not just worrying about how do I connect there and validate the data. It's also I'm trying to protect it from adversaries that may be trying to get it in some way or prevent me from getting that data in some way, right? And really the idea is that this all has to align with how people work and understand it and facilitate it in a secure way. That brings us to the frictions and risk. So when you don't have an automated method that kind of facilitates all this, this is what you end up seeing. You end up seeing manual review of information, so not real-time flows of information, but either data extracts from a data source or different files being created, being sent to individuals who then review it and then all approve it and then send it on its way. So it could be minutes, it could be hours, it could be days, right? Where information is reviewed and then from the time it's generated to the time that it gets to its destination. And then if data gets blocked, again, there's a slow approval processes here. So it's like, hey, you blocked this accidentally. can you please allow this right now? Again, you have to go find the right person. They have to go find the file. It's a complicated way of doing this where if you have automated rules that are standard, then if it's blocked, it's probably blocked for a reason. But there's also systems that allow it to move forward. And those policies and everything, right? When they're written down, they're documented. Now they're not as confusing. Whereas when it's manual, it sometimes it's like, well, who's approving it? They allow more things through than the other person. Things get very confusing with how it is, right? Whether it's kind of the in practice versus what's written down, right? Nothing is really, it's hard to get a true standard when people are involved. Um, and then across domains, you have different identity fragmentation. So if a user is logging into multiple domains, they have different accounts. How do I tie these different individuals to each other? Or if I have someone, a mission partner connecting in or accessing different published services, how do I know who they are from this service to that service? That gets really difficult. And with all of this, you find that there's workarounds that people start implementing because their job is mission, right? I have to get this done. I need this information now. Someone's life could be at risk. Some asset could be at risk. My systems might be at risk. I need to get this information to where I need it, right? And that's where you start seeing folks trying to figure out different ways of doing this. That might be like introducing some kind of less secure DMZ where they move data and then the other group can grab it, but it's kind of out of band and not architected the way it necessarily should be. It's just a workaround. People put it on USB drives. People email it to each other. They start taking screenshots and sending things. They pick up a phone and start sharing information. And all of these things, they're not logged, they're not audited, they're not controlled. You don't know you don't have the visibility, right? So it's a real problem. The friction leads to other security concerns. So that's where we start talking about the cross-domain aspects of things, and that goes into transfer and access. Right? Transferring cross-domain transfer is actually moving the data between domains, and then cross-domain access is working with the data where it sits. So we'll start with transfer, and then we'll talk about access. So secure data movement, so transfer, right? In order to do cross-domain transfer, you need to make sure that you are kind of extending that zero trust, right? So you want to make sure that what you're bringing into your environment is clean, so it doesn't, there's nothing malicious in there that might hurt me. You also want to make sure that it contains the information I was expecting, and you're going to want to make sure it's coming from where you're expecting it, right? To know who you're sending it from, who's the sender. So that's basically what you do in a cross-domain transfer solution. You're going to inspect it, right? So I'm going to look at the information. I'm going to parse it. I'm going to validate the structure. I'm going to do syntactic and semantic validations of the information. And if that passes, right, I'm going to sanitize the data. So if I have a Microsoft Office file or a PDF file, for example, those are known to carry 0 days, right? You open it up, it can be infected, and now I've infected my system because something was hiding inside there. Where if you apply sanitization rules, using things like CDR, content, disarm, and reconstruct, you essentially take the usable piece of that information. So like a PDF file, the user generated content of that PDF file. So the words, the formatting, the images, take it out, validate the structure, and then put it in a brand new known good version of that PDF. So whatever bad stuff was in that original version, it doesn't matter. It's all gone. It could have been good. It could have been the worst 0 day anyone has ever seen. It doesn't matter because it got left with the original file and just the user generated content moves forward. So you still have a fully functional document at the end of the day, but it's a safe document and it is because it's not trying to look at what's seen before, right? It's a zero trust way of kind of looking at it. Then you have the approval process, whether that's an automated rule that says, okay, all the validations passed, thumbs up. or it could be then a manual review, so an actual system that is designed for reliable human review when a file is sent to maybe like a user generated like a intelligence report. Maybe that has to go through some kind of human review before it can move. Have a system that's designed to do that, so that when you submit it to a group of reviewers who say, "Oh, I have something that's waiting for me." Look at it, shows all the results from all the filters, and allows them to approve it and pass or deny, right? Um, they when you're submitting, there are even tools like our trusted gateway where you can upload into the web portal, and the users even presented with, hey, we found a problem with dirty words, and then they could say, oh yeah, I forgot to take the notes out, excuse me, or I forgot to clean the header or the footer of this document. Fix it and then submit it, right? So more automated, faster responses, and more successful in getting things to where they need it. Everything is recorded. So everything, you have a clear audit log of what is moving through. So that way, you have that visibility. You know what has been sent, what has been received, and there aren't surprises in there. You're consistently applying classification rules, so looking at tagging and labeling and making decisions based on that and doing it in automated fashion. And then trusted movement across domains, and that could be either the protocol breaks based on the software cross-domain solution, or hardware-based solutions like optical or FPGA diodes to provide a hardsec-based solution. But or combinations of all of those, depending on what networks and what architectures look like. But moving it in a way that's approved, right? And Everfox has been doing this for over 20 years with software-based and hardware-based cross-domain solutions, and structured and unstructured data in all different form factors across the board. And that brings us to the cross-domain access piece of it. So again, this is working with the data where it lives. So you're not actually moving the data, you are going to the data, if you will, and then working with it. So and the image on the right here, you could see that this is kind of like what a user would see if they were using an access solution. And their right-hand monitor, you could see 4 different windows, and you could see the banners, right? You have a red, like a blue-green, and a yellow banner, and then you have a web browser, and they are on different classification levels there, but on one endpoint, and they're able to work with it, and each one is separate from each other. They're sitting, and depending on the solution, it's either being accessed through a hardened endpoint. So the trusted thing client provides a trusted operating system at the endpoint that eliminates all screenshots and copy paste and all that stuff, and it only allows you to access each network and keeps them isolated from each other in terms of like screenshots. But or you have the Garrison device, which is providing a hardsec solution with an application that you sit on, typically on the high side endpoint, and you launch the application, and then you would again be able to access all of them, and you can't move any data in between any of the networks. But that high side, you can hit a screenshot on there, but you're already sitting on the high side, right? And that's kind of the idea behind it. But these enable you to collaborate in real time, because you're sitting there with the data where it sits, right? You're not moving the data, so you don't need to worry about integrating that information. If I have, say, we have customers that are moving like CCTV information, so security camera type of information. I don't need to have the same security camera system on my side to go look at it. You don't have to transfer me this security camera footage. I just need access to that system, and now I can work with it as I need it, right? So that's a great example. Or other types of information. If I have some kind of like cursor on target information and I need to get it to you, and maybe I wasn't expecting something happened and I need to get that, you need access to this information now, you need real-time collaboration, but how do I get this to you in a way that you can work with it in your system, which may not be compatible? Well, maybe I could provide you access, right? Controlled access, with role-based access of who you are, authenticated, and now you can work with the data where it sits. Um, or some more mundane use cases of I'm sitting on the high side, I need to do OSINT research, and I need a browser on the internet. How do I do that securely, right? Again, you can enable that kind of functionality here where you're keeping everything isolated. And the idea of cross-domain access is the endpoint that you're sitting on, that never, no data is actually getting to that. It's all just images from the screen, right? Your endpoint has no data at rest there. In terms from those individual networks, it's really just pixels coming back. It's really just images being streamed over. Um, so it's a really cool enabling technology. Also has the benefit of reducing the number of workstations at an endpoint, so there's some cost reductions there, which is really nice. And on the zero trust side, you are controlling access to that data through role-based access and authentication. So when they're coming in or your users are going out to these networks, they're using your authentication and your MFA technologies to be able to get there, and you're kind of extending those credentials to those destinations. So from one central kind of gateway, if you will, which would be the cross-domain access solution, you're controlling where they're going with this identity. So 53% of organizations in government, defense, and critical services still rely on manual data transfer, including paper, to move sensitive information. So this is from our Cyber 360 report. They did surveys. It's really interesting that you should take a look at it. And I'll mention it again at the end. But there's some really interesting statistics. But this is a really telling statistic here about manual processes, right? And like we were saying, when you have friction and you have need to move data and collaborate, you're going to find people are going to figure out workarounds, right? So, if you don't get ahead of it and if you don't start addressing it to figure out how to enable that more automated collaboration, you have issues. And there are a lot of places where automation and cross-domain type of solutions can be implemented. And the goal of all this, right, is to have a mission ready outcome, right? To have real time collaboration, be able to enforce identity access across the kind of the boundary of, when I'm connecting all these things, this is who I am that's being authenticated to connect to these places. You have visibility, you know what's moving, where it's moving, right? Who's doing it. You are collaborating, but it's controlled collaboration. I'm looking at my data tagging. I'm looking at the content moving through. I'm making sure there's no cybersecurity risks. Um, Continuous insider visibility. What are the users doing on those systems, right? That's visibility of data movement, but that's also visibility in how they're interacting. Like in the cross-domain access scenario, you have users working with systems. How do I protect from an insider risk, for example? Or how do I know that the person who's authenticated or the system that is authenticated is actually them, right? Are they behaving how I expect them to behave? So you have, activity and you have behavior, and we have our Evershield platform where you're essentially looking at those two things. You have user activity monitoring and you have behavior analytics that come together as the Evershield platform that allow you to, more confidently understand how your users are working with the data and identify who may not be working appropriately with the data, right? And you're doing it all in a resilient architecture where no matter which nation you are, what networks you're working with, we have solutions that can come together in whichever form factor you need to be able to make these resilient architectures that'll meet the mission. Right. And really at the end of the day, this is where you're trying to be able to collaborate wherever you need the data, collect data, work with your systems, pass the data to other folks who can use it in different ways, and create a more holistic picture of what's occurring and using data, kind of at mission speed. So kind of, in summary, you know, really collaboration takes data from all over the place, from different organizations who are collaborating. But you need to be able to trust each other, and you need to be able to do it in a way that reduces friction so that they don't find ways of doing it outside of the normal ways of the approved controls and ways of doing things, right? And to do that, you really need to have automated, secure collaboration. You want to apply best architectural process architectural practices when you're implementing these. We have a guide that's really good. We call it the Secure Collaboration and Data Movement Guide, and it's a really good summary of what we talked about here. So it's definitely worth a read. We also have the Cyber 360 report, which has some interesting statistics, which it's nice to be like, oh, I have that problem, or I don't have that problem, or oh, I didn't even realize that was such a big problem. It's an interesting guide, something to take a look at. If you'd like to discuss this with myself or anyone else in our organization, if you go to our website, everfox.com, there's places where it'll call out where you can reach out to us, and we'll be able to have these conversations, right? Someone will be able to talk to you about some of the solutions, and come up with something that might work for you and your environment.